The baby's cries cut through the morning mist like a knife through silence, piercing and desperate. Cascadia Moonweaver froze mid-step on the forest trail, her basket of healing herbs forgotten, as the sound reached her ears, a sound that made her newly mothered heart clench with instinctive urgency. She followed the wailing through dense pine and oak, pushing aside thorny underbrush until she found him, a tiny Apache infant, no more than 3 months old, wrapped in a torn cradle board and abandoned beneath a lightning-struck tree. His dark eyes were swollen from crying, his little fists beating the air in helpless fury. Without hesitation, Cascadia scooped him up, her experienced hands checking for injuries. He was unharmed, but clearly starving, his lips desperately seeking nourishment as she held him close. Her own son, little Jasper, was barely 6 months old, and still nursing her body responded immediately to another child's need. She, little warrior, she whispered in the Apache words her grandmother had taught her years ago, "You're safe now." As she settled against the wide trunk of an ancient oak to nurse the foundling, Cascadia's mind raced. How had an Apache baby come to be alone in these woods, so far from tribal lands? The nearest Apache territory was 50 miles south, and tensions between her settlement of Willowbrook and the tribes had been running. Since the recent cattle raids, the infant latched on hungrily, his tiny hand grasping her finger with surprising strength. In that moment, looking down at his perfect face-high cheekbones, thick black hair, and skin like burnished copper, she felt something shift in her heart. This wasn't just any lost child. This was her child now, in every way that mattered. Twigs snapped behind her. Cascadia spun around, instinctively shielding the baby, and found herself staring into the most intense dark eyes she'd ever seen. The man who emerged from the shadows was tall and powerfully built, his chest bare save for a leather vest, his black hair falling to his shoulders and adorned with eagle feathers. War paint streaked his cheekbones, and a tomahawk hung from his belt alongside a cavalry saber that told its own story. But it wasn't his weapons that made her breath catch. It was the raw anguish in his eyes as they fixed on the child in her arms. "My son," he said in accented English, his voice rough with emotion. Cascadia's heart hammered against her ribs, but she didn't release the baby. He was alone, starving. The warrior's gaze moved from the child to her face, then to her exposed breast where his son still nursed. Something flickered in his expression, surprise, perhaps, or recognition of her kindness. "You feed him," he said, not quite a question. He was hungry. She lifted her chin defiantly, even as fear coursed through her veins. "I couldn't let him suffer." For a long moment, they stared at each other across the small clearing. She should be terrified, a white woman alone with an Apache warrior, nursing his child in the middle of nowhere. But the way he looked at his son, the naked love and relief in his face, told her this man was no mindless savage. "I am Nighthawk Thunderstorm," he said finally. "This is my son, little fox." "Cascadia," she replied, then added impulsively, "Moonweaver." His eyes sharpened at her surname. "You know the old ways?" "My grandmother was Cherokee, she taught me, ... things." "Cherokee." He nodded slowly. "Cousin tribe." "You speak True Tongue some?" She switched to halting Cherokee, then to the few Apache words she knew. I mean no harm to your child." For the first time, something that might have been a smile touched the corners of his mouth. "You give life to my son. How could this be harm?" The baby had finished nursing and was now sleeping peacefully in her arms. Nighthawk stepped closer, close enough that she could smell the wood smoke in his hair, the leather of his clothing, the wild scent of the mountains. "How?" she asked quietly. "How did he come to be alone?" The warrior's jaw tightened. "Soldiers came to our winter camp 3 days ago. Said we harbored cattle thieves. My woman, Dancing Doe. She hid with little Fox in the forest when the shooting started. When I found her..." His voice broke slightly. "She was dying, shot by a soldier's bullet. She gave our son to the wind spirits and begged them to send him a protector." Cascadia felt tears prick her eyes. "I'm so sorry." "The spirits sent you," Nighthawk said simply. "A mother with milk, a heart that hears crying. Babies. This is no chance meeting. He held out his arms for his son, and after a moment's hesitation, Cascadia placed the sleeping infant in his father's powerful embrace. Watching this fierce warrior cradle his child with infinite tenderness made something deep inside her chest flutter like captured wings. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now," Nighthawk said, his eyes meeting hers over his son's head. "I must decide if the spirits mean for you to remain in our story, or if this is where we part ways." The words hung in the morning air between them, heavy with possibility and danger. As the forest held its breath around them, Nighthawk studied the white woman who had given life to his son. His warrior's instincts warring with something deeper and more complicated. She should have run screaming at the sight of him. Instead, she sat calmly in the dappled sunlight, buttoning her dress with natural grace, as if nursing an Apache baby in the wilderness was something she did every morning. "Your people," he said carefully, "they will not understand what you have done here." Cascadia's laugh was bitter. "My people haven't understood me for a long time. The widow who talks to plants, remembers the old Cherokee ways, and refuses to marry the banker's son like a proper Christian woman should." "You are widow? 2 years now? Consumption took my husband?" Her green eyes grew distant. "Left me with baby Jasper, and more questions than answers about how to raise a son in a world that seems bent on war." Nighthawk considered this, a widow, with her own nursing child, living on the edges of white society. Perhaps the spirits had indeed chosen wisely. Little Fox stirred in his arms, making the small mewling sounds babies make when they're beginning to wake. Immediately, the sound triggered something in Cascadia. She reached out instinctively, then caught herself. "We'll be hungry again soon," she said quietly. "And I cannot give him what he needs." The admission cost him something. Apache warriors were raised to be self-sufficient, to need no one. But his son's survival trumped his pride. "There's a cabin," Cascadia said suddenly, "about 2 miles north of here, hidden in the hills. It belonged to my grandmother's people Cherokee, who stayed behind when the others were forced west. Been empty for years, but it's still sound. You could, that is if you needed a safe place. You would do this? Hide an Apache warrior? I would do this for a father trying to save his son." Something shifted in Nighthawk's chest, a warmth he hadn't felt since Dancing Doe's death. This woman, this unexpected gift from the spirits, was offering him sanctuary when her own people would call her traitor for it. "There is danger," he warned. "Soldiers hunt me. They believe I led the cattle raids." "Did you?" He met her eyes steadily. "My people were starving. The reservation gives us moldy corn and spoiled beef, when it gives us anything at all. I took cattle to feed hungry children. In Apache law, this is not theft. It is survival." "We understand each other." Cascadia stood, gathering her herb basket. "I'll show you the cabin, but first we need to discuss ... arrangements." "Arrangements? Your son needs regular feeding. I can't abandon my own child to live in the hills, and I can't bring an Apache baby to town without starting a war. So either you come with me to my farm some days, or I come to you. People will notice." The complexity of their situation was becoming clear. In the eyes of white society, what she proposed would be scandalous, a widow woman secretly meeting with an Apache warrior. Even with the innocent reason of feeding his child, no one would believe that's all there was to it. "You would risk your reputation for my son?" "I've already risked it, the moment I chose to nurse him instead of leaving him for the wolves." Adjusted her shawl, hiding evidence of her recent maternal duties. "Besides, reputation is just what other people think of you. It doesn't change who you actually are." They walked through the forest in surprisingly comfortable silence. Little Fox content in his father's arms, until they reached the hidden cabin. Built of weathered logs and chinked with clay, it sat in a natural clearing surrounded by protective pines. A small creek bubbled nearby, and the remains of a garden showed where Cherokee women had once grown corn and beans. "It's perfect," Nighthawk said, surveying the defensible position and hidden approaches. "My grandmother used to bring me here when I was small. She said it was a place where the old spirits still lived, where different worlds could touch without harm." As if summoned by her words, Little Fox began to fuss. His cries quickly escalated to full hunger wails. And Cascadia's body responded immediately. She felt her milk let down, her arms aching to hold him. "May I?" she asked. Nighthawk hesitated only briefly before placing his son in her arms. As she settled on the cabin's front step to nurse, he found himself watching not just his child, but the woman who was giving him life. Her hair caught the afternoon sun like spun copper, and her face held a serenity he hadn't seen since his own mother died years ago. "Tell me about your son," he said, settling beside her but maintaining respectful distance. "Jasper, he's everything good his father was, and nothing of. What was difficult? Laughs like spring water, curious as a cat, and completely unafraid of the world." Her voice softened. "Sometimes I think he knows things, old things. You watched me nurse your son without jealousy, as if he understood this was meant to happen." "Blood runs true," Nighthawk observed. "The gifts pass down even when the teachings are forgotten. Maybe that's why I found Little Fox. Maybe it wasn't chance at all." Their eyes met over the nursing baby, and in that moment both felt the subtle shift that occurs when strangers begin to become something more. Not lovers, not yet, but two souls recognizing they were bound together by something larger than circumstance. "What do we tell people?" Cascadia asked practically. "About where I disappear to? Why I'm gone for hours? We tell them you gather healing plants in the deep forest. It is truth in its way. And when Little Fox is older, when he needs more than just milk..." Nighthawk was quiet for a long moment. "When he is older, we will face those choices together, if you are willing." The word "together" hung in the air between them, loaded with possibility neither was quite ready to examine fully. Over the following weeks, an unlikely routine developed. 3 times a day, Cascadia would make the trek to the hidden cabin, sometimes bringing baby Jasper in his carrying sling, sometimes leaving him with her elderly neighbor Mrs. Pennybrook, under the pretense of gathering medicinal plants. Each visit deepened the strange bond growing between the Cherokee White Widow and the Apache warrior. Nighthawk proved to be more than just a fierce fighter. He knew the forest like an old friend, could predict weather by the way leaves turned, and possessed a gentleness with children that made Cascadia's heart flutter unexpectedly. He carved toys for both babies, sang Apache lullabies in a voice like distant thunder, and listened to her stories of life in Willowbrook with an intensity that made her feel truly heard for the first time in years. "Your husband," he said one afternoon, as they sat by the creek while both babies napped, "he was good man." Cascadia considered the question. Edwin was. He was kind in his way, but he saw the world in straight lines. Black and white, right and wrong, civilized and savage. He never understood why I talked to my plants, or knew things I shouldn't know. He feared your medicine gift, thought it was superstition, said it wasn't Christian. She watched water flow over smooth stones. "What about Dancing Doe? What was she like?" Nighthawk's expression grew tender but sad, like morning mist over water. Beautiful, gentle, but strong in ways that surprised enemies. She could track wounded deer for days, deliver babies in the middle of battles, make anyone feel welcome in our lodge. He paused. "She would have liked you. How can you be sure? Because she chose you. Through the spirits, through Little Foxes, need she brought you to us." The idea sent shivers down Cascadia's spine. She'd felt something like a presence sometimes when nursing Little Fox, a sense of being watched by benevolent eyes, of being guided by unseen hands. Their peaceful moments were shattered that afternoon by the sound of approaching horses, multiple riders moving fast through the forest. Nighthawk was on his feet instantly, tomahawk in hand, his body positioned protectively between Cascadia and the sound. "Take the babies inside," he commanded, in a voice that brooked no argument. But it was too late. Men burst into the clearing. Led by Deputy Marshal Boone Craddock, a man whose hatred for Indians was legendary throughout the territory. Behind him rode 3 of Willowbrook's most prominent citizens, banker Cornelius Fishburne, store owner Garrett Oakley, and worst of all, Reverend Malachi Stern, the town's fire and brimstone preacher. "Well, well," Craddock drawled, his hand resting on his gun. "What do we have here?" "Mrs. Moonweaver?" consorting with a red devil, nursing savage spawn? Cascadia rose slowly, little Fox still in her arms, her chin lifted defiantly. I'm caring for a hungry baby, Marshal. Since when is that a crime? Since that baby belongs to Nighthawk Thunderstorm, wanted for cattle rustling and murder? Craddock spat. And since you've been harboring a known fugitive, murder? Cascadia's voice sharpened. Whose murder? Corporal Henderson shot dead during the raid on the Apache. Winter camp. Reverend Stern interjected, his pale eyes burning with righteous fervor. This heathen savage killed a good Christian soldier. Nighthawk spoke for the first time, his voice deadly calm. Henderson shot my woman while she held our child. I killed him. Yes, it was justice. It was murder, Stern shouted. Moonweaver have been aiding and abetting this killer while engaging in the most depraved acts. Imaginable, nursing a savage baby like some kind of animal. The insult struck Cascadia like a physical blow, but it was Nighthawk who reacted. With a movement so fast it seemed like magic, he had his knife at Stern's throat before anyone could blink. Speak of her with respect, he said softly. Or don't speak at all, Nighthawk. No, Cascadia called out, still clutching little Fox. They want you to give them a reason. For a tense moment, the clearing held its breath. Then Nighthawk slowly stepped back. Lowering his weapon but not sheathing it, Craddock's gun was out now, pointed directly at the warrior's chest. Drop the knife, savage. You're under arrest for murder, cattle theft, and corruption of a white woman. And what about me? Cascadia demanded, stepping forward despite the danger. What's my crime, Marshal? Adultery, Reverend Stern said with vicious satisfaction. Fornication with a heathen savage. The good people of Willowbrook won't stand for such abomination in their midst. I've committed no adultery, Cascadia replied coldly. I'm a widow caring for a motherless child. No decent woman nurses another race's spawn, Banker Fishburne added, his voice dripping disgust. It's unnatural, perverted. Oh, what's unnatural? Cascadia shot back. Is letting an innocent baby starve because of his parentage. Craddock stepped closer, his gun never wavering. Drop the knife, Thunderstorm. Last warning. Nighthawk looked at Cascadia, then at his son in her arms, then back at the Marshal. Slowly, he placed his weapons on the ground. Smart choice, Craddock sneered. Now, step away from the woman and child? No, Cascadia said firmly. If you're arresting him, you're arresting me too, Cascadia. Nighthawk began. We're in this together, she interrupted. Whatever happens. Reverend Stern's eyes glittered with malicious triumph. So be it. The whole town will see what comes. Of defying God's natural order? Marshal, arrest them both. As iron shackles clicked around Nighthawk's wrists and rough hands seized Cascadia's arms, little Fox began to wail it. A sound that seemed to echo through the forest like a prophecy of the trials to come. The jail in Willowbrook was a stone building that smelled of despair and unwashed bodies. They put Nighthawk in the main cell and Cascadia in the smaller women's holding area, separated by thick walls but close enough that they could hear each other speak if they raised their voices. Little Fox's cries echoed through both cells, a sound that tormented his father and broke his wet nurse's heart. The baby was refusing the cow's milk and sugar water that Mrs. Pennybrook kept trying to give him, growing weaker by the hour. Please, Cascadia called through the wall for the 100th time. Just let me feed him. He's going to die. Good, came Reverend Stern's voice from the outer office. One less savage in the world. The casual cruelty of it made Nighthawk grip the bars of his cell until his knuckles went white. If not for his son's need, he would have already found a way too. Escape Apache warriors didn't stay caged for long. But little Fox was sick, growing sicker, and running would mean abandoning him to die. On the second day, an unexpected visitor arrived. Helena Nightshade, the wife of Judge Bartholomew Nightshade, and the closest thing Willowbrook had to high. Society. She was a small, elegant woman in her 50s, with steel-gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. Marshal Craddock, she announced in a voice that could cut glass. I've come to see the prisoners. Ma'am, I don't think I wasn't asking your opinion. She swept past him into the jail area, taking in the scene with sharp intelligence. In the women's cell, Cascadia sat pale and hollow-eyed, her dress stained with leaked milk. The men's cell, Nighthawk paced like a caged wolf, and in Mrs. Pennybrook's trembling arms, little Fox wailed weakly, too exhausted now for the full-throated cries of earlier. "My God," Helena breathed. "That baby is dying." "Natural consequences of unnatural acts," Reverend Stern said piously. Helena turned on him with fury that could have melted steel. "Reverend, I've known you to be a fool, but I never took you for a baby killer, Mrs. Nightshade," Stern sputtered. "I hardly think you hardly think at all, which is the problem." She turned to Craddock. "Marshal, this is unconscionable. That infant needs his wet nurse." "Orders from the territorial governor," Craddock replied, though he looked uncomfortable. "No contact between the prisoners." "Then the territorial governor is an ass," Helena snapped. She studied Cascadia through the bars. "Mrs. Moonweaver, are you the child's wet nurse?" "I am." Cascadia's voice was hoarse from crying. "And you've been nursing him how long? 3 weeks?" Helena nodded grimly. "Then he's bonded to you completely. Without your milk, he'll die within days." She turned back to Craddock. "I'm going to telegraph my husband immediately. A circuit judge. He has authority over this jurisdiction." "Ma'am, with respect." "The territorial governor can explain to Judge Nightshade why he's allowing an infant to starve for political reasons." Helena's smile was razor-sharp. "My husband takes a very dim view of using children as weapons." She left in a whirlwind of righteous fury, her heels clicking against the stone floor like bullets. Within an hour, a telegram arrived from Judge Nightshade ordering that the baby be allowed to nurse for humanitarian reasons. Reverend Stern protested vehemently, but even he couldn't argue with a direct judicial order. When they brought little Fox to Cascadia, the baby latched on desperately, his tiny body shaking with relief. Across the jail, Nighthawk sagged against the bars, his worst fears temporarily eased. "Thank you," he called to Helena, who had returned to oversee the nursing. "Don't thank me yet," she replied grimly. "The trial starts tomorrow, and sentiment in town is running strongly against you both." That evening, Helena returned alone after the other officials had gone home. She brought food, blankets, and something more valuable: information. "The territorial governor is up for re-election," she told them quietly. "He's using your case to prove he's tough on Indian problems. The prosecutor he's sending is Jeremiah Blackstone. He's known for his theatrical style and his ability to sway juries with emotion rather than facts." "What about evidence?" Cascadia asked. "Blackstone doesn't need evidence when he has prejudice. He'll paint you as a depraved woman, corrupted by savage influence. And Nighthawk is a murderous predator who seduced you into betraying your own race." Nighthawk spoke from his cell. "What chance do we have?" Helena was quiet for a moment. "Honestly, not much, unless we can find someone willing to speak for your character. Someone the town respects enough to listen to." "Who would do that?" Cascadia asked bitterly. "I'm already the town eccentric, and he's Apache. There might be someone," Helena said thoughtfully, "someone whose voice carries weight throughout the territory. But it would mean revealing secrets that have been kept for 40 years. She stood to leave, then paused at the door. "Mrs. Moonweaver, that Cherokee blood you carry, it comes from your grandmother, doesn't it?" "Yes, my mother's mother." "Why? What was her name?" "Her Cherokee name, I mean, singing bird who knows the heart of trees." Helena's eyes widened. "Dear God, I thought you looked familiar." She gripped the bars of Cascadia's cell. "Child, do you have any idea who you really are?" "I... ... What do you mean?" "Your grandmother saved my life when I was 16, along with 12 other white captives taken by renegade soldiers pretending to be Indians. She was famous throughout Cherokee territory as a healer and peacemaker. When the Cherokee were forced west, she stayed behind to tend to anyone who needed healing, white or Indian. It made no difference to her." Helena's voice grew excited. "There are people still alive who remember her kindness. Important people. Politicians, army officers, territorial officials, people who owe their lives to singing birds, medicine, and mercy. I still don't understand." "Don't. You see, you're not just some eccentric widow who lost her mind over an Apache baby. You're the granddaughter of one of the most respected women in territorial history? If I can gather the right testimonies, if I can remind people of your heritage." For the first time since their arrest, hope flickered in Cascadia's eyes. "You think it might make a difference?" "I think," Helena said with grim determination, "we're about to find out what this territory is really made of." The courthouse was packed to overflowing on the morning of the trial, with people standing in the aisles and spilling out onto the street. Word had spread throughout the territory about the unusual case an Apache warrior and a white widow accused of adultery and corruption. With a starving baby at the center of it all, Prosecutor Jeremiah Blackstone was everything Helena had promised: tall, silver-haired, and possessed of a voice that could make angels weep or devils tremble. He wore his righteousness like armor. In his opening statement, painted a picture of moral decay that had the packed courtroom murmuring in agreement. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Blackstone thundered, "we are here today to confront the very breakdown of Christian civilization. Before you sits a woman who abandoned her sacred duties as a white mother to engage in the most depraved acts imaginable with a savage murderer. And beside her, the red devil who seduced her from the path of righteousness with his heathen ways." Cascadia kept her eyes fixed straight ahead, little Fox sleeping peacefully in her arms. The judge had ruled that the baby must remain with his wet nurse for humanitarian reasons. But the sight of her nursing an Apache child clearly disturbed many in the courtroom. "The evidence will show," Blackstone continued, "that Mrs. Moon willfully and knowingly harbored a fugitive from justice, a man who murdered Corporal Henderson in cold blood. But more than that, she engaged in adultery with this savage, corrupting her body and soul through unnatural congress with an inferior race." Defense attorney Thomas Whitmore rose to object. "Your Honor, there's no evidence of adultery." "Objection overruled," Judge Cornelius Blackrock declared. "The prosecutor may continue." Nighthawk watched the proceedings with growing anger. He understood enough legal English to know they were being railroaded, and the judge's obvious bias made a fair trial impossible. Beside him, Cascadia held Little Fox closer, her knuckles white with tension. The first day of testimony was brutal. Witness after witness described seeing Cascadia enter the forest, finding her nursing the Apache baby, discovering her secret meetings with Nighthawk. Reverend Stern's testimony was particularly damaging. He described the unnatural perversion of a white woman giving suck to a savage spawn. But on the second day, Helena Nightshade's carefully orchestrated plan began to unfold. "The defense calls Colonel Samuel Morrison," Attorney Whitmore announced. A murmur went through the courtroom as a distinguished military officer took the stand-up. Man whose chest bore ribbons from 3 wars and whose word was respected throughout the territory. Colonel Morrison, Whitmore began, "Do you know the defendant, Mrs. Cascadia Moonweaver?" "I know her family history," Morrison replied in a clear, strong voice. "Her grandmother, known as Singing Bird, who knows the heart of trees, saved my life, and the lives of 12 other white captives in 1847. The courtroom stirred with interest. This was not what they had expected. "Can you elaborate, Colonel?" "Certainly. A group of renegade soldiers, deserters from the Mexican War, had taken us hostage while disguised as Cherokee warriors. They planned to sell us to slave traders in Mexico. Singing Bird found us, healed our wounds, and guided us to safety through 200 miles of hostile territory. She asked nothing in return, except that we remember kindness has no color." Morrison's eyes found Cascadia and the defendants. "Chair. Mrs. Moonweaver carries her grandmother's blood and her grandmother's gift for healing. I've seen her Cherokee heritage in her face since she was a child. What she did for that Apache baby is exactly what her grandmother would have done, save an innocent life, regardless of politics or prejudice." Blackstone objected strenuously, but the damage was done. Morrison's testimony had planted a seed of doubt about the prosecution's narrative of corruption and perversion. The defense called more witnesses. Martha Littlecrow, an elderly Cherokee woman who had known Singing Bird personally. Dr. Benjamin Hawthorne, who testified about the medical necessity of wet nursing for infant survival. And most surprisingly, Captain James Rutherford, the Army officer who had led the raid on Nighthawk's camp. Captain Rutherford, Whitmore said, "You were present when Corporal Henderson was killed? I was. Can you describe what happened? Rutherford's weathered face was grim. Henderson was overzealous in his duties. When we came upon the Apache camp, I ordered the men to secure the area and search for stolen cattle. Henderson broke ranks and began firing indiscriminately at women and children. The courtroom was dead silent now. What did you do? I ordered him to cease fire, but he ignored my commands. That's when the Apache warrior, the defendant, intervened to protect his family. Henderson shot the man's woman while she held their baby. In response, Nighthawk killed Henderson with a knife throw. In your professional military opinion, Captain, was Nighthawk's action justified? Rutherford straightened. Under the Articles of War, any soldier who fires on civilians, especially women and children, is guilty of a war crime. Nighthawk was defending his family against an unlawful attack. In his position, I would have done the same. Prosecutor Blackstone was on his feet, objecting furiously, but the testimony stood. For the first time, Nighthawk was being portrayed not as a savage murderer, but as a father protecting his child. The final defense witness was the most unexpected of all. Randolph Whitmore, the territory's wealthiest businessman and Thomas Whitmore's uncle. Mr. Whitmore, the defense attorney said, you've had business dealings throughout the territory for 30 years. In your experience, what is the character of the Apache people? Objection, Blackstone roared. Irrelevant. Your Honor, defense. Attorney Whitmore replied, the prosecution has characterized all Apache as savage and inferior. I'm simply providing context about their true nature. Judge Blackrock reluctantly allowed the testimony. In my experience, Randolph Whitmore said carefully, the Apache are a proud, honorable people who value family above all else. They fight when threatened, but they are capable of great loyalty and love. The man sitting in this courtroom risked everything, including capture, to ensure his son's survival. That speaks to character, not savagery. As the defense rested its case, the atmosphere in the courtroom had shifted perceptibly. What had begun as a slam-dunk prosecution was now genuinely in doubt, but the most dramatic moment was yet to come. During the prosecution's rebuttal, Jeremiah Blackstone made a critical error. In his fury at seeing his case weakened by the defense witnesses, he overreached. Ladies and gentlemen, he declared, pointing dramatically at little Fox in Cascadia's arms, that child is the living symbol of everything wrong with this unholy alliance. Mixed blood, tainted by savage heritage, he represents the mongrelization of the white race. The words hung in the courtroom air like poison gas. In that moment of shocked silence, something extraordinary happened. Little Fox, who had been sleeping peacefully throughout most of the trial, opened his dark eyes and looked directly at the prosecutor. Then, in a voice that carried throughout the silent courtroom, he laughed a pure, joyful baby's laugh that seemed to mock every word of hatred that had been spoken. The sound broke the spell of fear and prejudice that had gripped the courtroom. Several women in the gallery smiled involuntarily. Even some of the jurors seemed to soften as they looked at the innocent child, who had become the center of this legal storm. But Blackstone wasn't finished. And you, Mrs. Moonweaver, he continued, his voice rising to a fever pitch. You have betrayed not only your race but your very nature as a woman. You have allowed your body to be corrupted by savage seed, nursed half-breed spawn as if they were equal to white children. This time, it was Nighthawk who reacted. Rising from his chair, despite the shackles, he spoke in a voice that carried absolute authority. You will not speak of my son, or the woman who saved his life with such words. Savage. Blackstone sneered. You prove my point with every eye. A.M. Nighthawk Thunderstorm, son of Chief Red Eagle, grandson of the war leader Stormwalker. My bloodline traces back 15 generations through leaders and healers, warriors and wise women. My son carries the blood of chiefs and the blessing of spirits. He is no mongrel. He is royalty among my people. The courtroom was utterly silent now. Nighthawk's dignity and quiet pride were undeniable, making Blackstone's ranting seem small and ugly by comparison. And this woman, Nighthawk continued, his eyes finding Cascadia's, She who gave life to my son when he faced death, who risked everything to save an innocent child, she has more honor in her smallest finger than you possess in your entire body." Judge Blackrock pounded his gavel. "Order. The defendant will be silent." But the damage to Blackstone's case was done. His theatrical hatred had been met by genuine dignity, and the contrast was stark. During jury deliberations, Helena Nightshade paced the courthouse steps like a caged panther. "It could go either way," she admitted to Attorney Whitmore. The testimony helped, but prejudice runs deep in this territory. 3 hours passed before the jury returned. The foreman, a weathered rancher named Jonas Clearwater, stood to deliver the verdict. "On the charge of harboring a fugitive," he announced, his voice steady, "we find the defendant, Cascadia Moonweaver, not guilty." A gasp went through the courtroom. Cascadia felt her knees nearly buckle with relief. "On the charge of adultery and moral corruption," Clearwater paused, looking directly at her, "not guilty." The courtroom erupted, half the gallery cheered while the other half shouted in outrage. Reverend Stern looked apoplectic, while Prosecutor Blackstone's face turned purple with fury. "And on the charges against Nighthawk Thunderstorm," the foreman continued, once order was restored, "we find the defendant not guilty of murder, as his actions were in defense of his family. However, we do find him guilty of cattle theft, with a sentence of time served and restitution to be paid to the affected ranchers." It was as close to complete victory as they could have hoped for. Nighthawk would be freed immediately, and Cascadia was cleared of all charges. But more than that, the trial had changed something fundamental in the community's understanding of justice and humanity. As the shackles were removed from Nighthawk's wrists, he moved immediately to Cascadia and his son. For the first time since their arrest, he was able to hold little Fox freely, his powerful hands tender as he cradled the child who had unknowingly become the catalyst for so much change. "What happens now?" Cascadia asked quietly, as the courtroom slowly emptied around them. Nighthawk looked at her, this remarkable woman who had risked everything for his child, and felt his heart make a choice his mind had been avoiding. He said, "We face the question of what we mean to each other." The words hung between them, heavy with possibility. They had been bound together by necessity and circumstance. But what they had become was something deeper, something that deserved honest examination. Helena Nightshade approached them with a smile. "Mrs. Moonweaver, I have a proposition. My husband owns a large ranch about 50 miles north of here, in more progressive territory. He could use a manager with your knowledge of both farming and healing." And she looked meaningfully at Nighthawk. "Someone with expertise in handling horses and understanding the land." "You're offering us both employment?" Cascadia asked, surprised. "I'm offering you a chance to build something new, away from the prejudices and small minds of this place. My husband believes the future of this territory depends on people who can bridge different worlds." Nighthawk considered this carefully. "And my son? He would be safe there." "Safer than here," Helena assured him. "There are other mixed families in our area, other people who've chosen love over convention. Little Fox would grow up knowing he belongs somewhere." That evening, as they prepared to leave Willowbrook forever, Cascadia and Nighthawk finally had their first truly private conversation since the forest. They sat by the creek behind Helena's house, both babies sleeping peacefully nearby, and faced the question that had been growing between them for weeks. "I need you to know," Cascadia said softly, "that everything I did for little Fox. Not because I expected. That is, I don't want you to feel obligated." Obligated, Nighthawk repeated thoughtfully. "This is not the word for what I feel." "Then what do you feel?" He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, in Apache tradition, when the spirits send a sign this clear, we listen. "You appeared when my son needed you most. You risked everything, your reputation, your freedom, your life, to save a child who shared no blood with you. This is not obligation. This is the beginning of love." Cascadia's breath caught. "Love. I watched you nurse my son, sing to him, defend him as fiercely as any Apache mother. I watched you stand trial rather than abandon him. You have already claimed him as yours in every way that matters. How can I not love the woman who gave my child life? But I'm white, she whispered. Your people, my people, honor courage above all else. They would welcome the mother of Chief Red Eagle's grandson. His dark eyes met hers. But this is not about my people or yours. This is about us, about what we choose to build together. The question hung between them like a bridge waiting to be crossed. 6 months later, Cascadia stood in the doorway of their new home, a comfortable cabin on the Nightshade Ranch, watching Nighthawk teach both Little Fox and baby Jasper to ride their first ponies. At 10 months old, Little Fox already showed the fearless balance of his Apache heritage, while year-old Jasper approached everything with cautious curiosity inherited from his mother. The boys had become inseparable brothers, understanding each other in the wordless way of children who've shared the same milk, the same lullabies, the same loving hands. To them, the idea that skin color should matter was as foreign as the idea that the sky should be jealous of the earth. This is Thunderstorm. It's called a familiar voice behind her. Cascadia turned to see Helena Nightshade approaching with a wide smile. Even after all these months, hearing her married name still sent a small thrill through her heart. The wedding had taken place under an ancient oak tree, witnessed by both Apache elders and progressive white settlers, conducted by a Cherokee minister who spoke the ceremony in 3 languages. Helena, she replied warmly. What brings you by today? News from town, Helena said, settling beside her on the porch. Both good and troubling. Tell me the good first. Judge Nightshade received word that 3 more mixed marriages have taken place in the territory this month. Your trial seems to have given other couples the courage to follow their hearts openly. Cascadia smiled. The troubling news. Reverend Stern has been preaching about the mongrelization of the territory. He's gathering supporters, talking about petitioning the territorial government to ban mixed marriages entirely. The news wasn't entirely surprising. Men like Stern didn't abandon their hatred easily, especially when confronted with evidence that love could indeed conquer prejudice. What does your husband think will happen? Bartholomew believes the territory is changing too fast for the old guard to stop. Every year brings new settlers with more progressive views. It's more mixed families, more children who don't see color as a barrier. Helena's eyes twinkled. He also believes your boys are going to be part of the generation that makes such hatred obsolete. As if summoned by their conversation, both children came running toward the porch, their faces bright with excitement and grass stains. Mama, Mama. Little Fox called out in his mixture of Apache, Cherokee, and English. Jasper rode Thunder, horse, all by himself. Did he now? Cascadia gathered both boys into her arms, marveling as always at how naturally they had bonded. Little Fox had never known a time without his milk brother. Jasper accepted the Apache boy as simply another part of his family. Nighthawk approached more slowly, his expression thoughtful. Over the months, he had grown into his role as husband and stepfather with the same natural grace he brought to everything else. He treated Jasper as his own son, while Cascadia had formally adopted Little Fox according to both Cherokee and Apache traditions. Penny for your thoughts? Cascadia said as he joined them on the porch. Thinking about the future, he replied, settling beside her. About what kind of world our sons will inherit. A better one than we were born into, Helena said firmly. Thanks in no small part to the 2 of you. That evening, after Helena had gone and the boys were asleep, Cascadia and Nighthawk sat by their fire, sharing the comfortable silence of couples who no longer needed words to communicate their deepest thoughts. Do you ever regret it? She asked suddenly, leaving your tribe's territory, building this mixed life? Nighthawk considered the question seriously. I regret that Little Fox will grow up far from his Apache cousins, that he may never learn all the old songs and stories. But I do not regret choosing love over tradition, hope over fear. Even when people like Stern try to tear down what we've built, especially then. He took her hand, calloused fingers intertwining with hers. Hatred is loud, but love endures. Our sons will grow up knowing that family is not about blood alone, that strength comes from standing together against those who would divide us. And if they face discrimination, other children call them half-breeds or mongrels, and they will remember who they are, children of chiefs and healers, warriors and peacemakers. They will know their worth comes not from the opinions of small minds, but from the love that created them and the courage that protects them. Cascadia leaned against his strong shoulder, watching the fire dance in the hearth. Sometimes I wonder, what would have happened if I hadn't found Little Fox that day? If I had just walked past, ignored his cries. But you didn't, Nighthawk said simply. The spirits knew your heart, knew you would not leave a child to suffer. Everything that followed came from that one moment of choosing compassion over convenience. And what comes next? Next, we continue building. Next, our sons grow strong and proud. Next, we prove that families can be forged by choice as surely as by blood. He kissed the top of her head gently. Next, we love each other and teach our children that love is always worth fighting for. As if in response to his words, a baby's cry came from the bedroom, not distressed, but the simple call of a child who has had a dream and needs reassurance that his parents are near. Little Fox, Cascadia said, rising immediately. I'll go, Nighthawk said, but she was already moving. She found both boys stirring in their shared bed. They refused to sleep apart, these brothers of the heart. Little Fox was sitting up, his dark eyes seeking the familiar comfort of his chosen mother's face. Bad dream, little warrior? She whispered, gathering him close. Dreamed the angry preacher man took you away, he said in his child's mixture of languages. Never, she replied firmly. No one will ever take your family away. We stay together, always. Jasper stirred and reached for his brother, and soon both boys were settled back into sleep, their small hands clasped together in unconscious trust. Standing in the doorway, Nighthawk watched his wife that's what she was in every way that mattered, tuck their sons back into bed. In that moment he saw their future spread out before them, grandchildren who would carry the best of all, their bloodlines, a legacy of love that would outlast the hatred of small minds, and proof that the human heart recognizes no boundaries when it comes to family. The lost Apache baby in the forest had been hungry for more than just milk. He'd been hungry for love, for belonging, for a family that would claim him regardless of the world's divisions. In finding that family, he had given them something equally precious, a love story that would echo through generations, proving that the greatest victories are won not on battlefields, but in the quiet courage of choosing compassion over fear. In years to come, when Little Fox and Jasper were grown men with children of their own, they would tell the story of how their family began, with a crying baby in the forest, a woman who couldn't ignore a child's need, and a warrior father who recognized that love, once given freely, creates bonds stronger than blood, deeper than tradition, and more enduring than the prejudices of any single generation. The lost Apache baby had found more than a wet nurse in those woods. He had found the beginning of a new world, one family at a time.